caught up. Thank you so much for joining us today for this panel discussion on creating a community of learners through synchronous student engagement. My name is Mark Knitka. I'm a full-time faculty member here at the University of Arizona Global Campus, and I work with students in live sessions in a number of different areas. And I brought in some of my colleagues, all who work at the University of Arizona Global Campus, who also work in wonderful synchronous engagement with our students. So first on the panel, we have Aubrey Ghaffari, LSCC, who is the manager of the Center for Women's Leadership at the Forbes School of Business and Technology and runs synchronous sessions through that program. We also have Holly Uso, assistant professor in mathematics and also in the Academic Engagement Center. We have Dr. Clifford Blizzard, lead faculty for the science at UAGC and the honors program point of contact, and also in the Academic Engagement Center. And we have Dr. Wendy Conaway, an associate professor and lead faculty in the Academic Engagement Center in the College of Arts and Sciences. And Dr. Conaway is here representing Toastmasters International Club at the University of Arizona Global Campus. So I would just love to hear a little bit. Maybe we'll start with Wendy, just how long you've been doing synchronous sessions and what types of synchronous sessions you run. Just a brief overview of that, of what you do.
Thank you for the question, Mark. Speaking of impromptu questions, which is something that we cover in Toastmasters International, back in early of 2021, we recognized that there is a distinct gap in oral communication, which is a necessary workplace skill for our students. And we decided to bring Toastmasters International, which is a nonprofit educational foundational process and curriculum, into UAGC to fill that gap. And in doing so, it provides an opportunity for students to practice their oral communication skills in a live, synchronous, supportive, nurturing, and safe environment. We meet once a week, which is a fairly frequent opportunity for students to be in a synchronous situation, and they find it very helpful to have a group of people who are supportive of their goals and to have a consistent opportunity to come to the table to get their needs met. That, I think, is the opportunity that we provide in a synchronous learning opportunity using Toastmasters International.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And just to clarify, this is an extracurricular club activity, correct?
It is.
Yes.
It is.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Blizzard, would you like to talk about what types of synchronous sessions that you work with here at the University of Arizona Global Campus?
Sure. First of all, a shout out to our panelists. I have to learn I've never figured out the trick of mirror computing. So anyway, to Mark Knitka, who has been taking a major role in the live learning opportunity for Science 207, our dependence upon the environment, which is a gen ed science course here at UAGC. And he has been spearheading really from the beginning, the live learning sessions. I've stepped in from time to time. I joked with him. I think the very first time I stepped in, nobody showed up. He gets much better visitation. But anyway, I have done that several times. And although Mark is the reigning expert, I am also involved in the honors program, where in June of last year, we implemented a program setup in which students are expected to complete 15 hours of co-curricular experiences. And these experiences can include attending various live events. And at Honors, we offer a variety of live events. We have roundtables and live learning sessions that are really more or less similar in nature. And we're also involved in offering a monthly club, the TED Talks Club. And a lot of these events feature discussion. So there may be, in the case of the live learning and roundtables, a brief presentation by a faculty member, but then that's always followed by at least half of the time being devoted to discussion. In the TED Talks framework, the students watch a TED Talk on a particular theme for the month, and then we facilitate discussions with those students. And then usually about halfway through, we'll watch a second one with a contrasting perspective on or a different point of view, different topic perhaps related to that central topic of the month, and then have a hearty discussion. These are all 1 hour events. So they've been going on now for a couple of years, and we regularly now with the live honors events are drawing about 20 students each time, which is delightful. It's actually just about the sweet spot, I think, for a conversation. So,
thank you so much, Dr. Blizzard. Holly, would you like to talk about your involvement with synchronous sessions?
I'd be delighted. Thank you, Mark, and thanks to my esteemed colleagues. I have been to several of the Toastmasters meetings, and they are a hoot, and you get valuable feedback on your own speaking, things you might not have been aware of. It really is a valuable experience if people give it a try. I think most people would really enjoy it and would benefit from it. I know I did. So I've been involved in the last couple of years in live learning mathematics. So we've been holding live sessions with students for about 18 months. We started with 1 session a week in the pilot. This is UFP grant supported research. So I earned 1 grant that last year, and then I got another grant this year. Well, they asked me a question. So assuming the question goes well, the second grant will allow us to expand that. So starting from only 1 session a week that covered 2 of our 4 math classes, it was a co-sit session, so students from 2 different classes could attend. And I hosted those sessions, and then based on the data that Dr. Mingjin Bao and her team were able to collect and disseminate, it was shown that students who attended these sessions, especially in the STEM courses such as math, Sci 207, there are a couple of other courses, maybe Phi 208, but especially the STEM course, it was particularly impactful, and student performance was raised by 6 points. That's as compared to other students who had similar demographics and similar performance beforehand. Sorry, not demographics, similar performance beforehand, then those same students, they were still doing better. Because of that, our live learning expansion has been funded, and we now have 6 sessions that meet for 2 of the math classes, plus the co-sit. So I guess it's 3 of the math classes each week. And starting later this month, we will have required live learning for our math classes being revised. And that will hopefully go well. If that goes well, then we plan to continue expanding to required live learning wherever it's pedagogically appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Holly. And last but not least, Aubrey, would you like to talk about your work with synchronous sessions here at the University of Arizona Global Campus?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I'm the manager with the Center for Women's Leadership. And so we're in a unique position to provide several different events, live learning events throughout the month. We typically will do a keynote, a workshop, and then a community chat. So each of those providing different forms of engagement for students, having different kinds of themes each month, focusing around women in leadership, what it's like to be a leader. We try to also focus on what it's like to be in the field that we're focusing on that month. And then we also have the community chat where we're bringing in people from the university to help us give students a chance to reach out to and connect with other clubs and organizations that already exist in the university itself. So really trying to collaborate and connect with other people in UAGC and get students connected where they need to be, being more collaborative instead of trying to, compete against the other people who are also doing live sessions. So yeah, that's what we love to do. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Aubrey. And before we get moving forward with the panel questions, I think we do have a poll. I would just love to know where the audience is coming from. Teresa, do you have that poll handy? Or maybe I can run the poll actually even. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I hope I covered, and I do have an other category just in case I didn't think of something, but I know we do have a diverse audience. Many people maybe coming from online or hybrid, higher education, maybe K through 12. So yeah, a lot of online asynchronous higher education right now. An online hybrid K through 12. Awesome. Give it just a few more moments. And if you're not aware, I do see a lot of familiar names and faces here from the University of Arizona Global Campus, but in case you're external. We are primarily an asynchronous online institution, but I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, we've been doing a lot more with especially optional synchronous sessions. You've heard us use some terms like live learning and a number of different extracurricular clubs and activities. And I think that that's something that we're really seeing value from, hence the purpose of this panel, to share some of our experiences and positive things. All right, it looks like the poll results, perfect. So we're primarily online asynchronous higher education people. And I believe the next poll is also about role as well, Teresa. Thank you. We can run that, but we can run that and maybe continue on with some questions. So the first one I had is, and maybe this would be a good one for the end, but I would just love to hear from the panelists. With what you've been working with, what do you see as the future direction of synchronous learning at online universities, especially those that have historically been asynchronous types of engagement?
I guess I'll dive in. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Clifford.
Holly. Okay, I'll dive in. I had no real advanced thoughts, so we'll see what comes out of my mouth here. No, I think that there's I have done live learning here. I've also done live learning at past universities where I've taught. There's another university, Kaplan University, which is now Purdue Global, which also they have required weekly synchronous sessions in a lot of their, basically all their classes. They call seminars, and they're fairly similar to the live learning we have here. So I think it's definitely going to increasingly become a component of the university experience. I think that it provides a sense of community, which we're fortunately, I think the early days, and I'm old enough to say that I was around for some of the early days, 15 years ago. I guess that's pretty close to early days of online learning. You really was that the worldview was really the student is going in and tracking through with blinders on, pretty much just going on through getting their degree. It's the whole point. They come in, they get their degree, and they go down the pipeline, and they get their degree. And I think increasingly we're beginning to realize that a vital facet of the university experience is learning along with others and working with others in meaningful, richly engaging ways. And I think that synchronous learning is just such a vital component of that. I'm finding that actually things work out naturally in the discussions I'm having with students, that if the students are very knowledgeable about a topic, very invested in it, they'll jump in with go on camera and speak. But if they're more hesitant, they'll type in chat. And then I just share, I read aloud what they're saying, and then that works really. I do more of the speaking, but we still have this rich conversation. And it's so with 10, 15 students talking at once. It's a richness of connection that happens that I think it would be tragic to go back to that kind of setup of just sort of get your blinders on and go and get your degree. So much is lost. So much of learning we know is collaborative. Learning doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in interactions. A whole theory of social interactionism, which says that we learn by interacting with each other. And I'm grateful to see that taking an increasing role in the university world, online.
Thank you so much for those great points, Clifford. Thanks for sharing your perspective and experience. Holly, did you want to have some thoughts too?
I did. I love Clifford's ideas. One of the things that your question reminds me of is this quote that's been passed around. It's something that was, I think, on the TLC website, but it's also something that that Sarah Steinberg mentioned in the talk yesterday. The part about that USC study about promoting at-promise student success. And the quote is, a validating approach among faculty, staff, other institutional agents, and peers, affirming students' capabilities for success was more important than specific programmatic elements. So in other words, for college students who face unique external demands, college students like those at the University of Arizona Global Campus, how the institution treats the learner could be more important than the programs that are offered. And I am a student of the paper on live synchronous web meetings and asynchronous online courses. It's reconceptualizing Virtual Office Hours. It's by Lowenthal et al., and it was published in 2017. In this paper, there were several student quotes, and there are a couple of them that really impacted me. Because I felt like having optional live learning was good. We were impacting students. The students could come if they wanted. But what the paper quotes from these particular students showed me was that even students who really valued going to live learning, they would not have attended first if there hadn't been some sort of incentive. So one student said, the reason I said I wouldn't attend without the points was I wouldn't have gone to start without the points. But knowing what I know now, I feel they, meaning the live synchronous sessions, sort of like virtual office hours, were worth going to with or without credit, but I wouldn't have gone to the first one without those tempting participation points. And another student, quote, really spoke to belonging. The student said that once they had their school's version of the live learning, it made the course the only online course they'd ever had where they felt a connection to the professor personally and to the other students. Seems to me that those are pretty valuable. And if we are knowing that students benefit from attending live learning, especially in the subject matters that they might avoid, like science or math, especially in those areas, that then if the student additionally feels that sense of community and belonging, that is where the student feels safe to ask questions and safe to learn. So I feel like the future of it is that it's going to be expanding because students are going to say, I made this connection, this personal connection in the live learning, and then one student will tell another. And then because there is a component of the course that's graded related to live learning, students will be incentivized to go the first time to discover just what a light in their day it is.
Thank you so much, Holly, and thanks for sharing that research. And Allison posted in the chat the link to that research, which is really excellent. And that's what I guess that leads well in, unless anybody else has thoughts on the first question. But I was going to ask, and this was a little further down, but what are the pros and cons of having basically optional live sessions like clubs and extracurricular activities, or optional live learning or office hour type sessions and courses versus having required? And I think Holly touched on that a little bit, but does anybody else have thoughts? Because we know that our students a lot of times have busy schedules, different time zones. How do we basically get the benefits, or I guess, what are the pros and cons of required versus optional?
Well, I'll speak for that briefly because we have a PLA credit component for a reason. And it can sound cynical to say that students are going to prioritize things that are required. But then if you think about your own life, we all prioritize things that are required too. You know, I'm going to own right here on video that I have a recommendation letter that was asked for. I'm a couple days late on already. I know I need to do it, but it isn't quite required enough, right? So students, in order, and please let me know if my audio starts to go, Mark, I've closed everything I can on my computer. Great. The students have extremely busy lives, and they're going to prioritize, you know, getting the bills paid and things like that. And they're going to want to attend. They're really going to want to attend. It's like, I really want to be there. But the justification lies in some sort of credit. So I really fear that a non-credit, you're going to get the students selectively who have the time available, right? And they're highly motivated to come. And that's great. That's kind of, in a way, what honors is about, is meeting the needs of students, which I think is important to recognize. Those students that want to push themselves above and beyond, they need to have their needs met too. And I think live learning can do that. And you're going to get some students who are struggling, who really decide they're struggling enough, they really are motivated to be there. And that's wonderful. And I'm sure that happens a great deal in math. But I think that if you're going to get a substantial number of students to get a kind of rich engagement, you know, Mark, I don't know, not to put you on the spot, how many times you've had like 15 students attend. I know you've often had 5 or 7 or 8, but 15, 20, we have that now regularly with honors. And before we added this required component, we had a flurry at the very beginning when we put the news out about it. And then we started seeing 3, 5, 6. I tried to have an online book group. Boy, that was a flop. I think my record was like 3 people, 4, maybe 4 came once. And then it was like 1 and then none. You know, it just kind of went down from there. So, and I know of students that joined the group and wanted to be there, but it's just that they can't do that unless there's some little nudge. So I think it's really better. The challenge is making sure that if it is required, what the students are getting out of it is really rich, that they're not just kind of sitting there an hour, kind of wondering what they're there for, but that it really is a vital part of their academic experience.
Thank you, Clifford. Does anybody else want to touch on that question? If not, I can move on to the next question. Wendy?
The only thing I was thinking here is whenever we offer extracurricular, that is not for credit. As Clifford and Holly alluded to, the people who really need it are usually not the ones to take advantage of it. So the ones that are taking advantage of it are usually the ones that are the high achievers.
Thank you, Wendy. Great points. I'm going to move on to a different type of question, and I really like this one. What is the most successful online synchronous session that you've been a part of, and what was different about that session? How was it different? What went well? And I'd like to throw it to Aubrey if she would like to field that one. I think it might have been inspired by her questions.
Yeah, I was going to say on the last one too, I think these kind of go together. All of our sessions are not required. They're all on the student or faculty or staff to choose it to come. And so with that, I think our most successful ones are typically the ones that are centered around turning the learning back towards themselves, when it's centered around self-care, or how can you better integrate work-life balance, or some kind of workshop that gives them an idea of what their values are and points back to how can they develop the leader within themselves and less about the outside. So we really just had to adapt based on that information. We've had to adapt what kinds of content we provide, and always including an element that turns the event back towards themselves. That if a student is spending an hour of their free time in a day or 3 times in a month for our events, that we want to make sure that it's giving back to them and not just producing something for us, that it's always pointing back to the student. So that's what I would say to that one.
Mark, do you mind if I follow up with Aubrey and ask another question?
Sure.
So I know that you're always asking yourself how you might ensure students leave informed, encouraged, and motivated to take action. So I wondered, I'm curious, I haven't been to that many of your sessions. How do you utilize the features of the Zoom platform to increase engagement?
Yeah, I think, well, we work a lot with our speakers who come to speak for our events to really ensure that, do you want to use breakout rooms? Do you want to utilize emojis in the chat? Do you want to upload a PDF for people to fill out during the session? Does it look like doing a poll like you guys just demonstrated here, to really kind of keep people motivated to not just have it kind of streaming in the background like a podcast, but rather something that they can engage in and make that time more useful? We did that really well at our leadership summit, and I think that was a great example. We have those up on our YouTube if you want to check them out for your viewing pleasure. But that's another way I think that we use that well. Thanks, Holly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Holly and Aubrey. We actually have a question in the chat, and I would like to pose this one to the panel right now. What are the vital components of live learning that give back to the student or ensure students feel like they walk away with something? So I guess in a way that sounds kind of like, what's the value proposition for the students to come to a live learning, whether that's math or honors or science, or we have a number of.
Mark, there's several things. So the first thing is that when students attend live learning, the way my approach is called the 3 C's of live learning. I did another TLC talk on it, so I won't get into all the details, but in short, the first C is to connect with the students. So the very first thing I do is to get to know the student. I show a desk share, and then students will show a desk share. And we had 4 early in the session yesterday, and then a few people joined later. But at that point, other people started coming on camera to show similar desk shares. Someone showed different sized Post-it notes and someone showed their Post-it notes. Someone showed something they were cooking. So that connection at the beginning provides a safe space and a supportive environment where if the student has a question, let's say that there's a math problem that I'm working, maybe it's by request, maybe it's one I've made up, and the student has heard me explain it, maybe even twice, and they're still stuck. What's going to get that student to speak up? It's that feeling of the inclusive and belonging, that safe, that connection between the professor and the student. If that's lost, the students are just going to smile and nod, and they have having no idea what's going on. So to me, the connection is the first component that really makes a difference. So what do I have students take away from it? In addition to providing math instruction, I always connect with the student, connect the material to the real world. The theory of andragogy says students won't fully buy in unless they can see where this is practically useful. So like yesterday, I showed a very short clip of a video, which is the art guard theorem. There's actually a theorem on this, on how many guards you need in a certain space, so that, and if you put guards everywhere, that would be so expensive. So I talked a little bit about how other businesses can save money and do just as good a job if they have this information. So only then do I give the clear, concise explanation. So those are the C's: the connect with the professor, or connect with the student individually as a person, connect with the real world, and then clear, concise explanations. Maybe that's 4 C's. Maybe I need a little math refresher myself. So what I leave students with, though, is not just how to do a math problem. I leave them with an experience of co-solving a math problem together with me and classmates where they've been successful. And then I always include tips on how to succeed in the class and what the resources are. So at the end of the session, I'll say, now, if anyone wants a copy of the things that I worked out, I pull up a Word document, and you can use the ink feature to draw in with a marker on the screen. So I'll type things out and draw in, and everybody will always put in their email, at least in a direct message. Then I send that to the students, and then I have the opportunity to include other links. So I include links to the hub page, links to YouTube videos that relate that I've made. So I actually send out something to people every single time. And in all the Math Live learning sessions, the professor has said, hey, you can send me a question beforehand. So the student is left with, hey, I can send a question when I'm confused between sessions, but also I get this valuable information. If students didn't want that, they wouldn't put their email in the chat. So I feel like students leave well equipped and with a number of resources and sort of knowing how to get around. And I cover the most common sticking points in the session each time.
Thank you so much, Holly. Yeah, those are great points. And I also want to say, if anybody in the audience is engaged with live synchronous online sessions with students, if you have some like little ideas or stories or tips or tricks that have worked for you, feel free to share them in the chat. Actually, our panelist, Dr. Blizzard, had a great idea of kind of taking all of the panelists' ideas, tips, tricks, suggestions, things that have worked well, and any that the audience would like to share, and creating a kind of a document of some of these ideas, and then sending it out to everybody, and maybe making it a resource. So I saw, Wendy, you had your hand up. Did you have a comment?
Yes, I would also like to say, and I'm wanting to address the takeaways and the reasons and the ways we can get students to buy into the idea. And there are 2 things that I can think of, and they both have to do with career focus. First of all, one of the selling points, or actually several selling points, that we use to try to encourage students and alumni and faculty and associate faculty and leadership and administrators to join Toastmasters. I wanted to make sure everybody knows you're all invited, is to be able to strengthen your confidence and strengthen the people's confidence in delivering a presentation at a meeting, delivering a presentation at a conference, being able to answer impromptu questions in meetings or in interviews. There are so many valuable components to working on the public speaking skills that we found providing that synchronous opportunity for students to practice those skills in a safe environment is setting them up for future success. to the point where we are also incorporated, and I see Ted in this setting as well, incorporating this idea in our revision for our capstone course, because we do recognize the importance of developing and presenting ourselves in the workplace in a confident and productive way. That's why we are looking at that and trying to incorporate those skills in several different ways. We're encouraging students to practice their public speaking skills, and it also develops their self-confidence. And when you have self-confidence, the ability to tackle the unknown, the ability to take on risks, the ability to try something that you haven't tried before is stronger than ever before. The research tells us that about 75 to 77% of people experience a fear of public speaking. So if we can help those individuals overcome that fear, overcome that anxiety, that bolsters that sense of confidence that they can use in other areas of their lives. And that's one of the things, one of the outcomes I see from helping students learn how to help themselves.
Wonderful points. Thank you, Wendy. Actually, Teresa, can we run actually poll 3? I think I should have run poll 2 at the beginning, but I think I'd love to know from the audience what people who are here, what their experience is with synchronous sessions with students, whether that's a classroom type setting, an office hours, or extracurricular types of synchronous sessions. So this is how often do you facilitate synchronous online discussions and events? Yeah, looks like we have a diversity. That's good. Give it just maybe 20 more seconds. Looks like we have some people who are pretty active and involved with synchronous sessions, which is really, really wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. So yeah, a diversity, a number of people have been involved with synchronous sessions at least a little bit. So yeah, like I said, if you want to share like some of your things in the chat, like things that have worked well, maybe things that didn't go so well. And that's going to lead me into my next question for the panel, which
Mark,
is,
can I jump in? Can I jump in with one more answer to the question? Because I think I bring a little different perspective with the honors discussions we have than some of the other experiences. Now, I'm just going to throw out the idea, in particularly these TED Talks discussions that happens, is a sense of that experience of the seminar as mind walk, the opportunity to have that rich engagement with peers, where you feel like your voice is heard and you've heard something that's changing your perspective. And I think that, and then and particularly ideally that it's not coming from the instructor, that you're getting that deep connection with your peers such that you're having this flow. I'm going to actually jump into Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow. Dare we aim for flow, a condition where you're just kind of in this state of deep connection and engagement, where time kind of disappears a little bit and your sense of self disappears a little bit and you're deeply present. And that's something that I treasure from a lot of the deepest conversations I've had, whether with friends or in an academic setting. And it's something that the asynchronous world doesn't usually offer. So I think that maybe, I wouldn't say it happens every week or every time around, but if we can aspire maybe to those kinds of rich experiences, because that's something so valuable that I think the on-ground university context does really well, or can do really well, that I think with synchronous online experiences we can have as well. So sorry, just wanted to chip in with that.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. Those are great points. My next, that kind of ties in a little bit with my next question, which is, I think some of the panelists have already shared some of their tools and ideas that they use to engage students, to get them engaged. I just wanted to open it up and reiterate, like, are there any tools in Zoom, other things, different activities, questions that you use to get people in your online sessions actively engaged? I know one thing, and certainly at this conference, it's a different type of situation, but it's always nice to see lots of faces on camera in our live sessions, because that adds that additional element of connection. You can read body language a little bit. You can see that people are actively engaged with what's going on. So does Aubrey, do you have any ideas from your events and activities about?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry. Something I think that I haven't mentioned yet is that I think UAGC does particularly well is changing up your backgrounds on your Zoom. Something, if you guys are familiar with Parker Palmer, he says a lot about how your visual space really impacts your ability to learn, and all the way down to a chemical and neurological perspective. I think even so, something so simple as putting a plant in the background of your picture, like I'm noticing, and yes, like like that brought a lot of, like that brought something different to my emotion, right? And changing your backgrounds can even visually change your emotion and the way you might want to show up, right? So I think of Holly's background, it makes me feel really relaxed. And when I see the backgrounds that you have, Mark and Wendy, it makes me feel productive, but also it has a minimal, really background perspective. So anyway, that's something fun that I think I've been exposed to, not necessarily that we do at CWL, but something that I think has been demonstrated well at UAGC.
Then the natural question, tell me something about your background. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Thank
A
you,
great
Clifford.
icebreaker question.
Yeah, thank you for the pun, Clifford. That's one of Clifford's most cherished tools for engaging is the use of puns. And I see our colleague Dan Tiniano is here, and Dan is always great for his spaceship animated. It looks like he's on a starship traveling through the stars. Those are it's always one of my favorite backgrounds. Did any other panelists, Clifford, Holly, Wendy, you want to share any things that have worked well to get people actively engaged in your live sessions?
I just borrowed your trick, Mark, to have people do a desk share. Mark said, hey, if you get something off your desk and show it, then other people will have to come on camera to do it. And I found that is extremely effective. However, I find that I'm very low, I'm no pressure at all. So I don't say, now come on camera. Instead, I say, if you don't, say, I invite you to do a desk share if desired, or you can do a desk, describe your share. And I've had people show their kids, a pet, their calculator, their planner. It's really interesting because we connect as people. Someone showed an artwork, and I do some art, and I pulled a piece of art off the wall and showed my artwork. So being there and being willing to be vulnerable and to be a real person, I think is more important than the details. I think I might be trying, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Eli's question or comment. If you really knew me, you would. That might be a good one once everybody's done the first icebreaker, to have something like that. I never remember to do the 3 truths and a lie. I never remember to give the lie. I always give 4 truths. But if you have something like that could be done briefly, I feel like getting past that first level is important. And so a lot of times when I want to find out about a student, I'll go back and look at their introduction post. So at any rate, I feel like that there's no secret. And if there have been sessions that were really impactful, that were really great, I feel like it's more the students than anything special I did. I feel like I'm not on autopilot, but I do pretty similar things each time. But I'm vulnerable. Like I'll say, when I say you have to set aside time to study, I'll say I take classes these days as well. I'm a lifelong learner. And if I don't set aside time to do my homework, it doesn't get done. So I share my own personal experience. I didn't do well on a math test in high school, and I'll share about that. Yeah, I got a D on my algebra midterm. I failed biology in high school. I'll share about my struggles in education, because it gives students the impression that someone who later succeeded struggled initially. And that's one of the things I want my students to know, is that if they're struggling in this moment, they're not alone and they can succeed after that struggle.
Wow, thank you so much, Holly. Those are Yeah, wonderful, especially that sharing vulnerability. I think we've heard a lot about that in the last couple of years in terms of connecting with students, whether that's synchronous, kind of an online face-to-face like a Zoom, or through our email communications or other communications with students. Thank you for reminding us of that. I saw Allison asked a question in the chat. Has anyone had any issues with the opposite when you have one student or participant monopolize the conversation? Any tips for spreading out the engagement or giving other people a chance to speak?
I can speak to that. One of the things we do in Toastmasters is to provide time limits. We provide time limits for every different type of speaking in Toastmasters. We are very highly structured, and we offer a time limit for prepared speeches for between 5 and 7 minutes, and for impromptu speeches for between 1 and 2 minutes. Not only does that allow for more people to speak, since we don't have anybody abusing the time offered within that meeting, but it also helps us learn what it feels like to speak from 1 to 2 minutes, to learn what it feels like to speak from 5 to 7 minutes, because you're not always going to have somebody looking at their watch timing you. Not only that, but it also makes us more aware of the other individuals, the other participants who may wish to have the floor to either present a speech or answer a question. So it heightens our awareness of other people within that venue. So if we can internalize those time frames and recognize that there are ways to deliver our information without monopolizing our opportunities to speak, that, as Clifford would often say, is the sweet spot. And there you go, Mark. Perfect. Mark is demonstrating the backgrounds that we provide in our Toastmasters forums that signal when we have reached some of our time limits.
It's exactly what Mark did at the beginning of this. After I had shared, Clifford had spoken, and Wendy had spoken. When he asked a question, he directed it to the other person on the panel who hadn't spoken. So when I ask for questions, I will go through students individually by name. Kenna, did you have a question? David, did you have a question? And I'll make sure that each student either replies in the chat, or sometimes they'll unmute and then come back off mute, or then mute again. And by doing that, each student feels they had at least one, if not a couple of opportunities to ask a question. Sometimes when one subject matter material problem is being solved, then it reminds you of a question that you had. So I've had a problem where I suggest one with a fraction, and students say, oh, I have this other question about fractions. And so a lot of times I feel giving multiple opportunities to speak is important. And I put in the chat what happened. It doesn't often happen in live learning, but I feel that the needs of the group outweigh the needs of that one person to continue speaking. So I politely said something positive when I interrupted, and then redirected to the matter at hand.
I'd love to speak on that too, Holly and Wendy. Those are great points. So I think what I'm saying is probably just going to bounce off of those as well. But something I think we do well is at the end, when we want people to debrief what they've learned, instead of saying, here's 5 minutes of what I learned, or we'll say, what's one word, have everybody say, what's one word to describe what your experience was here today? What's your sticky takeaway in 2 to 3 words? How are you feeling at the beginning, and how are you feeling at the end? You know, kind of giving like an emotional odometer throughout the time together. But also we utilize the chat so much. So I will say in the chat, is there anybody else who would like to speak on this, or proposing a different question in the chat instead of coming on and interrupting? We've done that before, and it feels kind of awkward and clumsy. So we're still, of course, I think it takes lots of practice to try and smoothly navigate the conversation so that feelings aren't hurt or people don't feel like their ideas aren't valuable, right? But then saying, hey, I'd love for you to put that in a discussion board post, or hey, do you mind throwing that in our LinkedIn group later on today? We'd love to start a deeper conversation about that. So I think those are some tips.
I love those ideas, Aubrey. And so we're down to our last 14 or so minutes. I know we probably need a couple minutes at the very end to wrap up the session. But at this point, I'm going to use one of these methods, and I would invite anybody who would like to come on camera and maybe do a desk share, something that is around you that you think is interesting. This is my little shiny Buddha that reminds me to try to stay centered and calm. But if you want to come on camera, and then also too, once you're on camera, if you want to share any things that have worked well for you in synchronous sessions, and or ask a question to the panel, we would love to have that engagement. Or feel free to also ask questions in the chat as well. Teresa has a pretty coffee cup, I think, or teacup. Oh, Holly, that's the thing. The back. Eli has some nice flowers. Wonderful. The problem with backgrounds is they always want to fade out everything. I think Holly has a really pretty string of turtles plant. There it goes. I didn't see if. Oh, nice. Got some. Marie has customized Coca-Cola. That's really cool.
Jamie's got.
Is it a?
It's a paper mache bird with a graduate cap, a diploma. Yeah, the graduate bird.
Wonderful.
Jamie, it looks like a graduate turkey. Is it a graduate turkey?
It's actually a flamingo.
Oh,
And I do a whole session on this famous flamingo photograph. It's considered the holy grail of wildlife photography. And at the end, this little guy would come out.
And Professor Goldman is on screen. Can you say your name for us and show us your desk share?
Sure, yeah. Hi, my name's Ellie. So yeah, very close. And not a professor, but I do teach high schoolers. And one thing that I do with the course is I mail each student a course book. So during the actual session that we teach, there's no screen sharing. And so everyone's looking at each other like we are now. And we're all literally on the same page of the book. And so, Holly, let's meet on page 40. And can you start us off with reading the instructions? And so the classes are 90 minutes, but I'm talking for maybe 5 of those minutes. And then students are, as Clifford and others mentioned, peer-to-peer learning, peer-to-peer networking, more or less the entire time, which creates really high engagement and community.
Do you do breakout groups, Ellie?
Yeah. So we start every class with breakout rooms so they can have one-on-one connections, and they do that prompt, which is, if you really knew me, you would know. And some students take it deep, some students take it shallow, like what did I have for dinner, or what is deep on my mind, what's an important identity marker of mine. So and then we ask them, once they come back together, would anyone like to introduce their partner? What did they learn about someone else? So they're able to share their learning and build community with each other.
That's wonderful. It reminds me of the think, pair, share when I taught either blended or in person. I would always, instead of having students introduce themselves, I would have them partner up and then introduce their partner. And that way you got to have 2 people who had a connection. And often people would end up studying in those partners, sometimes for the whole session. It was like an 8-week session. So for the whole 8-week session. But it's really great. I love the idea that the students would be learning from the course material, not just their own ideas, but they're bringing in an academic source and then putting their own flavor to it. I would sometimes have students even give presentations. So here, we're going to do this chapter. So you do this section and this section, and this group does that section and this section. It's so engaging because the student, studies have shown we don't remember that much of what we read, but we remember, I think it's 90 or 95% of what we teach. So the student who taught that section is much more likely to remember it.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, it's very empowering to students, and I've appreciated this panel and all your experiences. So thank you for sharing and allowing me to join and share.
Thank you, Ellie. Wendy, did you have a thought?
I was just thinking about something that I always hear from Dr. Roseanne Bensley in our Toastmasters meeting is people will remember briefly what you've said, what you do, but they always remember about how you make them feel. And those connections in those synchronous opportunities allow us to help the students feel connected and feel the belonging and feel the relationships. And that makes a lot of difference. And I think that that's what underlies our attempts to get every student involved in live learning, because in a remote learning situation, it's hard to feel. You're in cyberspace. You're out there and you are really disconnected. So getting that feeling perspective, there you go, Aubrey. That's the quote. Roseanne has that, and that's her favorite quote as well. But if what we do in Toastmasters is help students feel that they are there for a reason, that it's going to benefit them. And instead of really focusing on what we're teaching them, it's how we can help them feel like they're going to benefit what we're going to provide for them.
Right, that's an excellent point. And I don't have any research off the top of my head or handy, but I do feel like there is some evidence to show that if people are in a positive mindset, if they're like emotionally positively engaged, then their learning retention goes up. So that's, I think we oftentimes discount that in either asynchronous formats with our email or textual communications with students, or in this type of format. Like, and I think every one of the panelists have mentioned how important it is to build up that initial connection and rapport with your students, with your audience, to get that connection going, and therefore the learning that takes place will hopefully stick better.
Yeah, if I might chime in agreement with that, based upon my own background. For many years, I was a Montessori teacher. And Maria Montessori's outlook on education was that you're educating the whole child. And our modern public school model tends to emphasize you're educating an academic component, which is kind of strange, as if you could abstract that from the rest of the being of an individual. It's like, we're gonna isolate this little organ of academic, like I guess the brain, and we're not going to think about you as a whole person. And this goes into our whole curriculum of care concept. It's beginning to embrace the entire person. And I think that one vital aspect of being a person is this kind of direct eye-to-eye connection and communication. So much of, as we've already spoken about earlier, one of the other panelists mentioned, so much of our communication, body language, is lost in the online discussion board. I think so much of who we are as human beings is lost in the online discussion board, in the asynchronous world. And I think redeeming that and beginning to move toward a model of really educating others as whole beings is such a positive thing. Academically, sure, but emotionally, dare I say spiritually, sure. I think in so many different ways, it enriches and empowers the student experience of online learning.
Hey, that's a great point, Clifford. One of the things I always try to do for our Toastmasters members is to encourage and thank them for being fully engaged in the meeting, to provide that eye contact, to make sure that they're not doing something and they're multitasking during the meeting, but being there, being present, being engaged, not only helps students reconnect, as Clifford was saying, but it also helps them reflect and learn what it's like to engage with other people again in some kind of a one-on-one or multiple on one session.
You know, one of my friends is a nurse, and she said that she always saw the person with a sort of a God spirit whenever she approached a person. And I think of that as something that teachers can do, whatever their religious or spiritual inclinations might be. But I like to think of the student in that moment of grace, or that spirit of grace. And I feel like that thing that my nurse friend did, to see each person as that spirit of God inside of them, that is something that when people are treated that way, they feel it. And so I feel like approaching the student with that amazing positive viewpoint and seeing their God nature, that is something that a student who's in that environment it's different than, oh, I'm here to do my job. Let me clock in and clock out.
Holly, there's actually, I'm just reminded of a photographer, and I wish I could remember who it was, did a series of photographs of people before and after saying to them, "You are beautiful." And their whole demeanor is transformed by that moment of empowering presence. It's just, it's awesome to behold.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Such great comments. And thank you, Clifford, and here at the end for pulling us back into the culture of care, empathy, advocacy, and non-traditional student success, which is, of course, the theme of the TLC conference that this year. So I think we're getting down. I think, Teresa, do you need a few minutes at the end to wrap things up? And I did want to say thank you to all the panelists for such great observation, sharing your experiences and what's worked well for you. Thanks for the audience for sharing in chat and sometimes coming on mic and on camera. Very much appreciate it. And thank you, Teresa, our wonderful host behind the scenes, making sure that everything is running smoothly. So.
Of course, this was such an engaging panel to be able to listen to. So thank you to all of you in the audience. I want to encourage you to, of course, enjoy the rest of day 2 of TLC. There are several more presentations that are running through 2 p.m. Pacific, but also especially to mark your calendars for our final keynote session tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Pacific with Clint Smith, who is a New York Times bestselling author and a staff writer at The Atlantic. Clint will be doing a fireside chat with representatives from the UAGC faculty body, student body, and staff body, which will be sure to be fulfilling for all of us. So thanks again and enjoy, everyone.